Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's August. We're not far from the back to school days, depending on when your school time starts are. And there are a lot of questions that are going on in regards to, well, not only what's going on with the education system, with some of the changes that we've seen come out with some of the mandate letters from the Smith government, but there's also questions about what's going on with the curriculum. It's been a while since the curriculum was able to bubble its way to the surface because of all of the other things that just keep happening in this province. So we're going to try to see if we can bubble a little bit up today. And we're doing that with the help of one of the experts on curriculum, in particular social studies curriculum in the province of Alberta, Dr. Carla Peck. I'm going to read from the bio from the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton, not Calgary. That's an inside joke. Dr. Peck is a professor of social studies, education in the Department of Elementary Education. She's got a bunch of letters. There's awards. There's a bunch of them. You got medals and stuff. Dr. Peck, welcome back to the show. 2023, Queen Elizabeth II, Platinum Jubilee. Who gave that one to you? Who presented it? I'm curious.
Rachel Notley gave that to me.
Okay, well, there we go.
Yes, nominated me and gave that to me. Yes, that was quite a surprise and an honor for sure. Yeah,
I did not get one.
Well, it completely caught me off guard when I got, the email saying I had been nominated, and I thought, my goodness, yes, this was not something I had ever even imagined. So yeah, it was a very lovely surprise.
Very cool. I almost want to see the medal. I've never seen one.
Well, as it happens, this was not planned.
There we go.
There we go. This was not planned. It just happens to be sitting on my desk next to me. Yes. So, and they pinned it on me, and there was there's a nice certificate that goes with it. That
Are there rules about like when and where you wear that?
There are. So you are allowed to wear it. And I think basically you can wear it, wherever I could probably wear it to go grocery shopping if I wanted to, but that's not something that I would do. But yes, it doesn't have the same level of protocol as something like the Order of Canada or something like that. It's where there is much more specific protocol about when and where these things can be worn and used, so I think it's further down, in terms of protocol than something like the Order of Canada, as it should be probably. But it's I don't know if anybody actually wears it when they go to events. Perhaps they do. I have not.
To me, that would be like the thing where I would just walk in and be like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
That's right. That's right. I could, I just, put it on, right here. Yes. So no, it was a real honor, and Dr. Darren Markland got one the same evening, and numerous other distinguished Albertans. It was quite an amazing night to be with people who are really spectacular and I've admired from afar. So it was a lovely evening.
That's very cool. Let's get into the state of education in Alberta. We chatted a few times about the Kenny curriculum. I feel like it's safe to call it, because I do feel like he had a direct hand in writing some of it, in particular your area of expertise, the social studies curriculum. So here's my opening broad question. What's going on with the curriculum these days?
Okay, well, the social studies curriculum, as you will recall, and your listeners will recall, when it was launched in March of 21, the social studies curriculum in particular received a huge amount of backlash because it was so inappropriate, it almost defied belief. My colleagues across Canada, it was released so close to April Fool's Day that my colleagues across Canada actually wrote to me and said, is this an April Fool's joke? Because they could not believe what they were seeing. And I've, had to say, no, it's not a joke. This is what they're really proposing. And while all of the curricular areas received a large amount of scrutiny, the social studies curriculum, proposed curriculum, was the only one that was actually repealed or pulled back from planned implementation by the UCP. And in December of 21, they released what they called a social studies blueprint, which was a very much a scaled down, high level overview of what they plan to do to revise the draft that was so bad that they actually pulled it back and said they needed to redo it. I took a really close look at what was proposed in March of 2021 and the blueprint that was released in December of 21. And frankly, they aren't that different when you get it down to what the content was actually going to be focused on from year to year in the different parts of social studies, whether it's history, geography, civics, or whatnot. And so I didn't have a lot of faith that whatever evolved after the blueprint would look very different at all from what we actually saw in March. So I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for information on what does the revised social studies curriculum look like, and we still don't have it. And that is a year and a half or a little bit more than a year and a half later. If the blueprint came out in December 21, this December, it'll be 2 years since that blueprint was released. I have written several times to the Minister of Education, the former Minister of Education, Adriana Lagrange, and I think she pronounces it Lagrange. Sorry, that's my French language coming in. And I most recently wrote to Minister Nicolaides to ask for an update. I wrote both times in July, last July, July 22, and which would have been 6 or 7 months after they released the blueprint. And then I wrote again this July asking for an update. And in July 2022, the response I received was that they were planning to pilot this coming fall, September 2023. However, when we didn't see any signs of the curriculum being released for feedback or piloting, even small pieces of it, or just giving it to teachers, so they would have a little bit of notice about what they would be piloting in September. When that didn't come about, I thought, well, we have a new Minister of Education. I'll write again to find out what's going on. And this time, the response was that they don't have any information about when it will be ready to be released or when it will be piloted, and that they will be sure to engage their stakeholders in the future. They look forward to doing that, but they don't have any definite dates about when the social studies curriculum will be piloted at this point. my first clue that something was up was last year sometime. I can't remember exactly when. No, that says updated March. So last year the government released a K-6 curriculum implementation and supports timeline that's available on their website. And it starts in April of 22 and goes to September 24. And it provides time, a timeline for when all the different subjects are going to be piloted and then implemented, but social studies is not mentioned on that document at all. So that was my first inkling last summer that something was up, which is what it also in part what prompted my email to LaGrange last July. And then I looked at the timeline again this summer to see if it had been updated. It had not been updated. So thought, well, let's try again now we have a new minister of ed. So, but I actually got a less specific response this time.
Have you heard any, I guess one of the questions that I want to ask is that because going into the first curriculum redraft or drafting, because correct me if my history is wrong, please, but my understanding, or at least my recollection, is that there was a curriculum development process that happened over several years that was initiated and implemented over more than one government. So it was initiated by the PCs, the NDP kind of kept the ball going. And one of the big election issues in 2019 was, there's this woke curriculum is bad, and so we have to get rid of this woke curriculum, and we have to there was a couple of other buzzwords that were being used by Mr. Kenney at the time, but that was one of the things that they campaigned very heavily on. And then when their rollout happened, it was bad. I mean, there was no short. We were talking before we started. You've got a mug. I've got a mug. There was merchandise that was made that people bought because of just how bad the curriculum, right, particularly the social studies curriculum, was. Do you think that it's? Have you heard about anybody who's working on it? Because we knew who was working on it with Mr. Kenney, the one guy, ostensibly. But have you heard of any working groups or any development groups or anything like that?
No, and in my email to LaGrange and Nicolaides, I asked very specific questions, including about who is working on it. Who is writing the curriculum? Are Alberta teachers involved? Are any Alberta-based education academics involved? There are 10 faculties of education in the province. They could easily go to, any of those faculties of education to find experts who could lend their expertise to the process. I asked, are Indigenous elders or knowledge keepers involved? What about members of other communities, LGBTQ2S+, immigrant and refugee communities, et cetera? People who were involved when the process began, sort of between 2010 and 2015-16. As you said, by several different governments, including it was begun with the Progressive Conservatives. And in the email from July of 22 and the email from July of 2023, those questions weren't answered at all. They just completely bypassed those questions and instead gave me pretty much a canned response that they would give to anybody who was writing to inquire about the curriculum. So I asked about who's involved specifically, including the list of people that I mentioned a moment ago. I asked which scholarly research on elementary social studies, on how elementary students learn in social studies, is being drawn upon to inform the work. There's a ton of research out there. If we're going to develop a curriculum, it should be based on academic scholarship on how kids learn, up-to-date academic scholarship. I asked about the engagement process for how they're going to get feedback on a new draft. All of those questions were completely ignored. And I was just given a pretty, probably what I would say, call a pretty standard, we're happy, we're glad that we're doing this curriculum revision work. We don't have an exact date yet, but we'll be keeping the public informed, and thanks for your interest, kind of thing.
I feel like you just wrote our next FOIP.
Right. Yeah. I tried to FOIP, I submitted a FOIP to try to get information on the contributions that Chris Champion made to the social studies curriculum. And I got nothing back. First, it was kind of denied, and then I rewrote it a little bit. And I think I got one email, that said, please find attached the draft. But of course, the attachment wasn't there. So I got zero information about what Champion's actual contributions were.
Yeah, some of the FOIP responses that we've gotten have been pretty comical. We asked about Dr. Henshaw's hiring and then unhiring, and one of the responses that we got was that they couldn't give us a reply because it could threaten the safety of law enforcement. And I was like, really though? Like, I feel like you're just copy pasting at this point. But
that's curious. That's a curious response.
I know. We've seen, and you kind of alluded to this, you kind of touched on this, there's been a change in education minister. We had for a good chunk of time, God help us, Adriana LaGrange. Some people would say running the show. Some people might describe it otherwise. I'm not here to adjudicate that. We now have Demetrius Nicolaides, who, when I think of Demetrius Nicolaides, the first thing that comes to my mind, well, the first two things that come to my mind are the allegations of, what is it called when you copy somebody else's work?
Plagiarism.
Thank you. The allegations of plagiarism, but the other thing that definitely comes to mind is that heartwarming, inspiring video he did where he was like, look at this wonderful white supremacist who was the MLA in the early 1900s, and he was so white and such a supremacist. I'm obviously taking some liberties with the wording that he used, but he did reference this very openly white supremacist individual, and chose to highlight him, which I thought was a fascinating choice. What are your sort of senses of Nicolaides? I mean, he was advanced education prior to Smith. He's now education. Does this make you feel good? Does this make you feel apprehensive? Are you going to just be a neutral answer on that question, or?
I have to say that I am nervous because, as somebody working in the post-secondary sector in Alberta, I have been living through absolutely devastating cuts, especially to the University of Alberta. Almost every university was cut, but University of Alberta seemed to get the brunt of them. And so much so that we lost, somewhere like 1,000, 1,500 support staff, jobs just completely eliminated because our budget was slashed so devastatingly. There's been lots of stories of if a faculty member retires or leaves for another job, that they're just not being replaced. So I am extremely nervous about if he's going to take a similar tack with K to 12 education. We've already seen terrible cuts, 25 or 26,000 EAs laid off at the beginning of the pandemic and never really brought back, certainly not in those numbers. Class sizes that are, classes that are bursting at the seams because the class sizes are so large. In fact, the September issue of Alberta Views magazine just arrived in my mailbox today, and that's their front cover, is Alberta's bursting classrooms kind of thing. And cuts to the program unit funding that really provided supports for children who have particular early needs in their learning journey, and very specific needs. And, so we've already had those cuts. What else is going to be cut? What else is going to happen with charter schools? How far are they going to be expanded? Which every time you provide funding for a charter school, you're taking funding out of the public system. And I know people are going to say, well, charter schools are part of the public system in Alberta, but charter schools don't have to take every student that applies. They can impose fees on students like uniforms and, other sorts of things. And so they're not public in the way that actual public schools are. They're not governed by, they can run sort of as private entities in terms of their financial operation and this sort of thing. So, I am very nervous about what his appointment means for if what he did in post-secondary and he applies the same mentality to K to 12 education, then I think there's good reason to be nervous.
I'm going to use that as a springboard to one of the other topics that I wanted to pick your brains on a little bit. You talked about the charter schools and the differences that exist. There was an interesting little bullet point in the mandate letter that Smith issued to Nicolaides, which is the letter that's supposed to guide the course that he sets for his tenure as education minister. The bullet point, I'm looking at it right now, ensuring Alberta's education funding model continues to promote parental choice in education. This includes ensuring that Alberta's public, separate, francophone, charter, independent, private schools and early childhood service operators and home education systems, there's too many ands in that, are all appropriately funded to ensure the highest educational outcomes for students. So it seems to be very clear in the mandate letter that Daniel Smith wants to see the expansion of charter schools, the expansion of private schools, but being funded through taxpayer dollars. And this kind of aligns with the pitch that she had during her leadership, one of the pitches that she had during her leadership campaign, where she talked about, well, wouldn't it be great if the funding just followed the student and the student could choose wherever they want to go? Are you concerned about that at all?
I'm very concerned about that. And we've seen this is the model that's used in the US for charter schools, where money follows the student. And it's absolutely devastated public school systems in certain parts of the US. And again, I would say every time you're taking a dollar out of the public system, you're hurting the public system. You're hurting. Public schools are supposed to be schools where every child can get an education for free. A high quality education. Now, there's no question where there's always room for improvement, and there's always, the potential where some students' needs won't be met adequately. in the way that we would want them to be met in a public system. But for me, the answer is not then, okay, take that kid out of the system and put them into a private or a charter school. If a parent wants to do that, that's, of course, that's their decision. The answer, though, for me is we should be funding the public schools better so that they can, in fact, provide those supports, whether it's, the student who needs individualized attention or, to assist with literacy and numeracy or whatever the needs are. I would also say on the other side of the equation, not just about needs, but also about interests. Why shouldn't every kid in Alberta, if they want to pursue arts, the arts in some way, why isn't that something that could be available to every child in Alberta rather than just at one particular school or, this school or that school or a private or a charter school? Those opportunities should be made available, in my opinion, to everybody, because there are going to be some kids who have no idea that they're interested in arts and that they have a talent, maybe for singing or acting or whatever. And that without exposure to those kinds of programs, they may never discover that. So, or conversely, it's, sports or whatever the sort of interest area is. So for the kids who need specialized and specific supports, to ensure that they can learn to their fullest potential and develop to their fullest potential, we should be investing in the public system, but we also should be investing in the public system in ways that allow kids to absolutely flourish. And those could be the same kids. In fact, the kid who's got certain needs also wants to flourish, and maybe those arts programs or sports programs or tech programs or whatever they are what allow them to become, the amazing kids that they are and that they want to be and that they dream of being. But the minute you take money out of the public system, you damage the ability for the public system to respond in those ways.
I have a couple of specific things that I want to get your thoughts on in regards to the mandate letter, because that does, for the foreseeable future at least, set sort of the tone and tenor of the education ministry. I can't help but notice that the word social studies also does not appear in the mandate letter. The word social does, but it has to do in regards to a sentence where they're sort of talking in about the broad terms: we will take clear and decisive action to grow and diversify our economy while ensuring our health, education, and other core social programs are world class. Only one of those has to do with education, so I'm not sure why the rest is in there. But the other one has to do with a ministry working collaboratively with the Ministry of Education, working with the Ministry of Seniors, Community and Social Services. Other than that, the word social doesn't appear anywhere else in the mandate letter. But before we get too far into the weeds on that, what are your takeaways from the mandate letter?
Well, I mean, the big thing that jumped out to me, and we've talked about this already, is the kind of placing charter, independent, religious, private, homeschooling on equal footing with a public education system in terms of funding. And so that's really problematic for me. If somebody has the means to send their child to a private school, that is, of course, their decision, and it's sort of on them to pay for it. Why a private school should be partially funded by everyone else's taxpayers' dollars, I'm not I don't actually think that's, because it's not accessible to every child, right? Public funding should mean that it's accessible to every child, and so I really struggle with that. I thought the sections on curriculum were very vague and did not really point to anything ambitious or inspiring in curriculum, which is what, for me, this is what curriculum is all about. It should be ambitious. We should have high standards for our learners. And it should be inspiring, because I've always said curriculum is ultimately about the society that we want to create. It's about trying to imagine what is it that our citizens need now, but also into the future. And so in that way, curriculum is an aspirational and can be an inspirational program and document, for thinking about what kids are going to learn. None of that sort of aspirational, inspirational feeling was in the mandate letter at all. Yes, I mean, I know mandate letters are about setting the direction of the ministry, but it felt very lackluster and uninspired, I would say, and very pro-private, markets will sort of solve the problem, meaning that let's create a problem here so that the markets can come in and, the whole Noam Chomsky thing, break the public system, markets come in and private industry comes in to present a solution. So uninspiring, and very much in line with UCP ideology around education.
I mean, as you were talking there, I couldn't help but think, let the free market solve the problems, as long as it doesn't have anything to do with renewable energy, because
right, hold the phone. That's right.
I couldn't pass that one up. What do you make of, like,
that's a whole other podcast for somebody with way more expertise on that than me, but yes, very good point.
What do you make of, like, one of the cornerstones, to my understanding, of education is sort of that STEM pathway. What do you make of Danielle Smith's apparent decision to swap out the T, which is historically technologies, for now trades?
Again, this is very much in keeping, right, with the UCP and before Danielle Smith's time, that Kenny created what I think is a straw person argument that people were anti the trades. They were anti trade schools. I don't know anybody who's anti trade schools. I think I value post-secondary education, whether that means a university, a community college, an arts college, trades, whatever. I think that it's always, whatever path you choose, I think it's just important as human beings that we continue to sort of learn and evolve and recognize that we don't actually know everything when we graduate from high school, and that there's a big world out there and we know like this much about it. And, it's important to keep expanding our ideas and knowledge and be exposed to ideas different from our own, so that we continue to grow as people. But this is the kind of rhetoric, this anti-elite, and somehow if you have a university education, you're automatically pooled in with the elite, anti-intellectualism, this attack on anybody with a university education that you must be anti-trades because you've got a university degree. The anti-intellectualism and anti-academic that, during the Matt Wolf Twitter era, and Kenny's sort of reign over the UCP was crystal clear. There's no doubt that this kind of rhetoric and attack against academics existed. And to me, this is just a continuation of that. is it a little softer? Maybe, but it's the undercurrent is there for sure.
I mean, we might not have a Maddie anymore, but we've definitely got a Rob Anderson, and he's shared some thoughts on the Twitter machine.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm curious. One of the other things that, and we talked about this a little before we started the program proper, but one of the other things that we talked about, I want to get back into, because your expertise, the reason why our paths crossed in the first place was because of your expertise in curriculum and the idea of what curriculum should be. And it seems like in a lot of ways when Kenny and co were trying to produce their curriculum, what they were trying to produce was not a roadmap with all of the different roads between Calgary and Edmonton. They were trying to say, you will go from Calgary to Edmonton. You will start by taking 6 steps turning left, and then you will take this many steps, and then you'll see a creek. You'll walk over, and it was just incredibly prescriptive. One of your big criticisms, if I remember correctly, was that prescriptive format, especially when it doesn't come from a place of expertise in regards to curriculum development, is actually harmful. There's some other pieces in the mandate letter and in a couple of other mandate letters, at least one other one, that talk about, wouldn't it be great if teachers didn't really have to do that much schooling to become teachers? And, it strikes me that if you're going to go with this, you'll take 6 steps and then you'll take another 6 steps and look at the flower, look down at 45 degrees, then look back up, continue down the pathway. If that's the approach that you're going to take, which is harmful for kids' education because all it takes is one little curveball and now you don't know what to do, that could theoretically work with, you're just going to, ka-chunk, there's a new teacher, ka-chunk, there's a new teacher. But given the dynamic nature of classrooms, do you have any concerns about sort of this fast tracking of teachers that seems to be a theme in this mandate letter as well as the advanced education mandate letter?
Yes, definitely. So I first came across this issue in the mandate letter for the Minister of Advanced Education, who is tasked with exploring alternate means for teachers to be qualified, people to be qualified to become teachers. And the focus was on faster, how to get people into classrooms faster. I have real concerns about this because, my take on the curriculum process and the whole sort of orientation taken to curriculum by the UCP government, number one, it doesn't treat students as people who can actually think, that they are empty vessels who need to be told exactly what to think, and as if they don't have minds of their own, and thoughts and ideas of their own, and that the job is not to teach kids how to think, but instead it's to teach them what to think, which for a government that is so concerned about indoctrination is highly ironic, never mind hypocritical. So number one, the underlying belief seems to me that kids don't know how to think, and nor should we expect them to think. They should just sit and absorb. And number two, by providing such a prescriptive curriculum, the social studies was maybe the worst/best example, because it literally was hundreds and hundreds of bullet points of just factual information. To me, that was an attempt to kind of teacher-proof the curriculum, meaning that because it was so content heavy, the default way to teach it would be rote memorization, because it was so jam-packed, there'd be no time to actually think about the ideas included in it in any way, shape, or form. You'd only have time to remember this, give it back on a test. Okay, now move on to the next list of items I have to remember. And if all you're asking kids to do is memorize, then you don't actually need to know any pedagogy. You don't actually need to know strategies in how best to help students learn and support students in their learning. And so that's why I say this was an attempt to teacher-proof the curriculum. And to me, it reveals the belief among some members of the government, at least, that teachers are not professionals, that they are not actually highly qualified in understanding how do you get 30 different students who all have 30 different learning needs to actually learn what we're trying to do in the classroom. And they just see teaching as mere content delivery and not actual learning, content delivery, as opposed to learning. And so this idea about fast tracking people, and a friend of mine from Virginia reached out to me and said that there is a version of this that exists in Virginia, and people can be certified as quickly as sort of 6 weeks. And he said it's really bad. It's really bad. And so I have no idea what pathway the government is going to go down with this, but I would be really concerned if we ended up with something like that model in Virginia, because 6 weeks doesn't make you an expert in anything. It certainly doesn't make you an expert in trying to support the learning of 30 kids in a classroom, 30, let's say they're 8 years old or 12 years old or whatever age they are, and who all have different learning needs, who are all coming into your classroom with different experiences and knowledges and interests and so on. But again, if you just think teaching is about content delivery, then you're going to believe that that's enough, because all you need to do is stand somebody at the front of the classroom and say to students, learn this, listen to this. Well, I would like anybody listening to this podcast to try to stand in front of a classroom of 8-year-olds and lecture to them. Try lecturing to 8-year-olds even for 5 minutes and see how far you get, or 12-year-olds or whatever age. But that's the sort of mentality that teaching is just about content delivery and doesn't actually require specialized skill. When in fact, there's over 100 years of research on how children learn in different sort of subject areas. There's sort of general learning, but then also, in social studies, there's decades and decades and decades of research on how kids learn in social studies. And we're still learning every time we engage in a new research project. We learn something new about how kids learn. And so it's very, very concerning to me that there's this idea that you could just, in a few weeks' time, suddenly become qualified to become a teacher. I also think it's really insulting to the profession of teaching that people who have advanced degrees, there are a lot of teachers who have a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science and then a Bachelor of Education degree. There's some teachers who have a 4-year Bachelor of Education, but then have gone back to do their master's. We've got people with PhDs in education teaching in the classroom. And to say, oh yeah, none of that stuff is really important. Here, just do this 6-week program or whatever it would be. And, presto bango, you can be in the classroom next to the person who's got the PhD. I mean, it's hugely insulting to what is a really important profession in our society.
It strikes me almost as ironic in a tragic way, because one of the things that the UCP, and we kind of kicked off our conversation with this, with the trades piece, one of the things that the UCP has said is, oh, you need to treat tradespeople with respect. You need to acknowledge the skills and the proficiencies that exist in those professions. And in the same way that you can't go up to somebody who builds houses for a living and say, look, I did a tent. It's the same thing.
I did an online course about how to pour a foundation. I'm good, Good.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me pour the foundation of your next house. No, thanks.
Just because I set up a table and chair set from IKEA doesn't make me a carpenter.
Right.
But at the same point, like, just because I did however long of a course, that doesn't mean that you have the skills or the experience or to, like, when you said lecture to a room of 8-year-olds for 5 minutes, I'm like, that's some Lord of the Flies nightmare stuff that you're throwing down right there.
I mean, how many times, Nate, have you ever been like a guest speaker in an elementary school classroom right? And so you do your thing and you tell them things. And then the first question, it's like, do you like chocolate? Or it's got nothing to do, right, with whatever you just talked about. So, their teaching is a science and an art, and I would say there are in my experience anyway, I mean, I've now taught hundreds of people who are teachers. There are very few who I would sort of describe as a natural educator, right? That they have a natural skill. But so you have to work at it. You have to learn from others who've come before us about different ways to teach, because the method that you used last year may not work with the kids you have this year. The method that you used last year might have only worked for 5 of the kids in your classroom. And so you have to have another method that you're going to use to try and get those other kids. And so, I just find it incredibly insulting that there's this idea that anybody can teach, and that it doesn't require a professional background. And that, to me, this is what this sort of fast tracking kind of implies. Also, the great irony about this is that we already have several sort of faster track options that exist in the province. If you have a degree, like a Bachelor of Arts or Science or some other degree, you can do an after degree in 1 to 2 years, depending on the institution where you go, where you focus exclusively on the education component, If you have a trade, we have the Bridge to Teaching program where you can become certified. I think it's a year long. And that's, again, offered in different parts of the province. So giving the minister and the premier the benefit of the doubt, and I will assume that they know about these options already, although I'm not entirely clear that they do. If they know about these faster track options already, what then are they envisioning for something faster? And that's where my concern lies.
I mean, Smith didn't know that she couldn't tell the justice minister to try to drop a case. And I feel like that would be something someone might learn out of a quality social studies curriculum. I could be wrong.
Yeah, you might hope that your premier doesn't think she has the same powers as a governor in a state, but yeah.
I just got to say, I have had the opportunity on a couple of occasions to go into classrooms and present on things from other parts of my existence. And my favorite part was not so much, here, I'm going to talk about safety stuff or whatever. My favorite part was, I know that when I'm done, there's no way I'm going to be able to predict what the questions are going to be. Like, you just can't prepare for it.
No.
You just have to.
No.
And Yeah.
It's completely unpredictable. And, lots of teachers will do a lot of work to prepare students for a guest speaker. But even then, something will, who knows what they saw on TV that morning or what they were talking about at recess or whatever. And that's sort of front and center in their mind. And yeah.
Where, this is my big question for you. Where are you going to be watching? Because I know that there are a lot of teachers who are deeply concerned about the things that we've talked about tonight. I know that there are a lot of parents who are also going, I seem to remember something about this shit show of a curriculum. Whatever happened with that? Is that coming back? Did we kill it? Is it dead all the way? Or is this like a Sam Raimi film? So where are you going to be watching to see the developments in the social studies curriculum, in the fast tracking? I mean, I presume that Minister Nicolaides probably won't be making too many videos about historical figures in the immediate future, God willing. But what are you going to be looking? Where are you going to be watching? What are you going to be looking for?
So, of course, I'm very interested in what's going to be happening with social studies curriculum. In July of 22, then Minister of Ed, LaGrange said, somebody in her office replied that they were planning to pilot and solicit feedback from the public at the same time. I asked, and that was supposed to be happening this fall, but according to the response I received from Nicolaides, this July, it's not happening this fall. I asked last July, I asked for what the rationale was for piloting and soliciting feedback from the general public at the same time. And basically they said, well, given our timeline, this will help us get feedback all at the same time. And we can, incorporate all the feedback at the same time when we're making sort of final revisions. But my fear and I don't know what the approach is going to be now because there's a new minister and things seem to be in limbo with the social studies curriculum. My concern with soliciting public feedback and pilot classroom feedback at the same time is if we get a curriculum that's as bad or even as close to being bad as the one that we saw originally in March of 21. I mean, that curriculum was beyond repair. And it's only because of the public analysis and backlash that it was pulled. And so if we get something that's equally bad, maybe for different reasons, it's already being piloted in the classroom. If they do that at the same time, then it's kind of too late, right? The chickens are out of the barn kind of thing. And can't get them back in because they'll say, oh, well, we've developed there'll be all kinds of reasons why they'll say that they can't pull it back because resources, and it's been tested, and they'll point to any feedback that they got that was positive, and as they've done in the past, ignore any feedback that was critical. And then so that'll be too late. So I'll be watching for that. I will also, speaking of resources, be watching for resource development, because for the subject areas that have been piloted and implemented so far, physical education and wellness, and I think science has been piloted at least and is going to be implemented, I think maybe this fall, and a few other areas. There haven't been resources developed. Or there have been so few that they only touch on, small pieces of the curriculum. And what that means is that teachers are having to scramble to try and find resources that will help them teach the curriculum outcomes. It also means that there is could be no uniformity, so that somebody in northern Alberta is using something completely different than somebody in southern Alberta, which might be totally fine, because there is some benefit, of course, to being allowed to customize for your local context. But if there's no quality control whatsoever on resources, then that could open up all kinds of possibilities for not good things to happen, right? That somebody's using a resource that maybe they didn't realize, especially in social studies, maybe they don't see it as a racist resource or stereotypical or completely out of date or whatever. And so, I think that the resource question is a really serious question. I am going to be watching the teacher certification issue. It's the province that certifies teachers. So, what are they going to do around pathways to certification? And that is a very big concern of mine, for sure. I think the charter school, private school, the whole funding issue is also a huge concern that kind of runs through everything. But for me, the two big things are the curriculum with resources and the pathways to becoming qualified to be a teacher. That what we haven't talked about at all about, what doorways does that then open if you are qualified in other ways, not a Bachelor of Education, but some online thing that takes 6 weeks. I don't know what they're going to do. Does that then enable teachers who are otherwise certified, in this other way, that they don't have to become members of the ATA? So is this an attempt to do some union busting? Does it also mean you can pay teachers less because they don't have the same qualifications? And there are some places in the States where teachers make peanuts and they're having to work, 2 or 3 other jobs just to make ends meet. And so I think the teacher certification question leads to a bunch of other questions.
Yeah, as you were saying that right there, the thought that was kind of going through my head was, let's say that I'm a welder. I don't know. I'm not a welder. I tend to light things on fire when I try to weld. But let's say that I'm a welder and I decide that I want to be a teacher of the things welding to young minds. And so I have all of my welding credentials, and I go and I do my whatever the course looks like to become a welding teacher. I would presume, he said cautiously, that I would be hired to be a welding teacher, and that would be it. But I remember when it was a little while ago, but when I was in school, it was not uncommon to see teachers bounce around to different classrooms teaching different subjects. And so there's a part of me that goes, if you're going to say the trades are so specialized, they're so specialized that you have to have people who have worked experience in trades in order for them to be able to teach it. The question that comes to my mind is, okay, well, why not arts?
Well, this is a really good question, because right now, in Alberta and other parts of Canada, when you're certified as a teacher, you're certified as a teacher. It doesn't say social studies grades 7 to 9. It doesn't say math, elementary. It says you're certified as a teacher. And so what do these other pathways to certification mean for that question? Will restrictions be put on that if you go this route, then this is what you're able to teach? Right now, we don't have that in our system, for good and for bad, right? That you do not want me teaching your child math, believe me. that's not how my mind works. I don't see math and live math and think mathematically in the way that people who do. I see everything through a social studies lens. I can make connections to everything, to history, geography, place, you name it. And that's how my mind works. But if I was still in a K to 12 classroom, it's possible I could be assigned to teach math. And that's not good for students. And it's not good for me either, because I would be in misery. And you don't want a teacher who's, 2 pages ahead of the students in the textbook. You want somebody who actually has the knowledge and skill and capacity, in their subject area to be able to bring it alive for kids. And so, it's my long-winded way of saying, yes, that is a concern, what you raised about, what does an alternative pathway to becoming a teacher mean for when there isn't the possibility to offer a welding class because there aren't enough students who want to take it. And so now you've got a teacher who needs something to teach. What do we do then?
I just remember that when I was growing up, we had shop, and there was it only happened a couple of times, but we would get for reasons, the shop teacher would end up teaching language arts or social studies or math. And as soon as we saw him walk in, there was sort of this simultaneous, we're going to be able to get away with so much. And also he's going to get so mad and throw stuff. So it was a very different skill set, I think. And I shudder to think of, your math thing just gave me anxiety, because I have a nephew who's shown some of his work, and there's symbols on there. I don't know what those are. And so I can't imagine somebody who has, dedicated their life to a certain trade and then decided, maybe my knees. So they decide that they're going to go do 6 weeks or a year or whatever it is in order to explore this other pathway. And then they get thrown in a classroom like that. It doesn't seem fair to that individual. It doesn't seem fair to the students.
And I want to be really clear, that individual that you're describing might be the most amazing teacher ever. But what have we done as a profession by not supporting them, not making sure that they can do that transition, right? They might be amazing in the classroom and they might have lots of good ways to engage students, but you can't get a degree in literature or literacy over the summer when your teaching assignment changes. And so, if that is going to be what ends up happening, then we've got to make sure that teachers are supported, because it's not fair to the individual who's put in that position. It's also not fair to the kids. To like I said, you definitely would not want me teaching kids math. This is not my forte. And there's 2 comments I get often on my teaching evaluations. One of them is, you really made my head hurt, right? And to me, that's the best compliment, because it means I've made people either, rethink the way their assumptions about the world, or I've just kind of made them think about different things. The second, probably most frequent comment I get is from people who come into the class saying that they hate social studies. And by the end of the class, because they've had bad experiences with it, because it was all memorization, or, they just had terrible experience. People have all kinds of different reasons about why they hated social studies when they went to school. And by the end of the class, I've been able to turn those students around, and either they say something like, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but they're trying to say the importance of having passion for what you teach and being knowledgeable about what you teach makes a difference in the lives of students. Because those students will say to me, I hated or they'll write on the thing, I hated social studies when I started this course, but you've given me the confidence now, I think I can do it. Or you've made me see that social studies doesn't have to be what I thought it was, that it can be fun and interesting and challenging and this sort of things. And I couldn't do that if I was trying to teach math. I just couldn't, because it's not what I'm passionate about. And, so our children in our classrooms deserve nothing less than somebody who is passionate, who's knowledgeable, and who's well supported and respected.
Very well said. I'm kind of tempted to just leave it there, because that was a banger of a line you threw down there, Dr. Peck. Anything else you want people to hear? Anything else you want people to be aware of? I'm going to give the floor to you before we wrap it up.
I would just ask that Albertans don't take their eye off the ball when it comes to education, that there are many, many, many things deserving of our attention. And I know from my own experience that it can be draining and exhausting to try and have to pay attention to it all. And believe me, I get that. I've had to take breaks from social media and, other things to kind of regroup and not feel as down about things sometimes. But as I said earlier in the podcast, education is about our future. And we've got to make sure that the education that students are experiencing in Alberta is high quality, that it's accessible to all, that barriers, financial or otherwise, are not put up to students, so that they can't experience a high quality education. And it's because of the voices of Albertans that the social studies curriculum was pulled back and changes were made to other curricular areas. When the drafts initially came out in 2021, it's because of the voices of Albertans that the government was forced to listen. And we need those voices to still be there now and into the future, because I think there's a risk that education could kind of run under the under the water a little bit, and because it doesn't seem to be as a hot button issue as it was a couple of years ago. But the issues are still important. And so we need people to be paying attention and to raise concerns when they see them.
Well, especially if, one of the things that you talked about earlier was the idea that the UCP may have well learned from their curriculum mistakes. And if they do decide to pilot it as well as solicit public feedback, I remember when the first edition of the curriculum came out and they were like live editing the PDFs on the websites because everybody was going, what the hell is this? And that happened very, very quickly because people were engaged and people were paying attention to it. So I think that you raise a very important point, that it's critically important that people are preparing for that possibility, that it may have to be a all hands on deck in order to prevent something really horrifying from happening.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you're exactly right that the government, somebody in Alberta education was making edits to documents that were supposed to be getting, they were supposed to be getting feedback on, and they were changing the wording of certain sections. I've got screenshots of what it was and what it got changed to within a matter of hours. And it's only because of people, the general public, paying really close attention to say, wait a minute, didn't it say this? And now it's saying this. And I mean, that's just shady practice. You don't put something out for public comment and then change it while it's being commented on, because now people are viewing different documents and they're not commenting on the same thing. So yeah, we need active citizens who are willing to be involved and see the need to be involved. And we've got them here in Alberta because we saw it with the first sort of round of curriculum work. So we need those folks at the ready now for all of the issues that we discussed, and probably a whole lot more that we didn't have time to discuss.
Probably. And there will probably be, I imagine, no shortage of surprises when whatever happens, because I mean, if anybody had suggested to me that, when they roll out the new curriculum, this is the kind of evolving dumpster fire that it's going to be, I'd be like, there's no way. And now
it can't possibly be that bad. Ta-da!
If there's nothing else that anybody who pays attention to Alberta politics should know by now, is that it can always be worse.
Indeed.
Well, I hope that when we do see some movement on the social studies curriculum, we'll be able to get you back on the show, because I enjoy like, this is going to be off the cuff for nobody else is going to know what I'm talking about here, but like every time I think we've had you on the show, there's been like a half hour to 45 minutes of just like small talk that happens beforehand. I enjoy that just as much as I enjoy like let's get into the details. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, we always have lots to catch up on, that's for sure.
We do. And I mean, maybe next time you're on, you'll share the camel story with everybody else.
Well, now that's a teaser for the next time. That's right. Oh my. Well, yeah, I mean, certainly when we do finally see whatever the social studies is going to look like, you can be sure, for better or worse, I will have things to say about it. So whether you want to have me on or not is another question, but I will definitely be, I will definitely have things to say. And hey, if it's great, I am prepared to say it's great. This is not about just, trashing everything, that this government puts out. I would love it if it was the best curriculum I ever saw. I would love it.
I would love to do that episode. I would love to have you on and be like, so what do you think? It's all good. Okay, great.
It's amazing. So let's just put that out there into the ether and see what happens.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Peck.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.